Friends, today's episode is heavy. It's twisted with radical beliefs, family betrayal, and a murder so personal it shakes you. We're diving in to the story of Ron and Dan Lafferty, two brothers who didn't just commit murder. They claimed it was divine will. Their descent into religious extremism led to a brutal crime that shocked even the most hardened investigators. Hey, friends. You're listening to Cold-Blooded Serial, a true crime podcast, and I am your host and true crime bestie, Tika. Ron and Dan Lafferty were born to Warren and Claudine Lafferty in the 1940s. They were two of 8 children. They have 4 brothers and 2 sisters. Their mom, Claudine, was submissive, while their dad, Warren, was the complete opposite. Warren was verbally abusive to his family, and when he got pissed, he would beat his wife. Friends, listen to how disturbed this man is. One day, when Ron was a child, he didn't do a chore that his dad had told him to do earlier. And when his dad got home and saw that Ron hadn't listened to him, which he's a kid, he probably forgot. But when his dad got home and saw that Ron didn't do what he was supposed to do, his dad gathered all of his sons together and was like, "Hey kids, watch this." And he beat the family dog to death in front of all of his sons. And he's like, "Ron, this is your fault. Lesson learned. When I tell you to do something, you make sure it gets done." Yeah. What kind of discipline is that? Like, you're messing your kids up. And that wasn't even the worst part of their childhood. Warren, their dad, didn't trust conventional medicine. So he's like, "Listen, if one of my kids gets sick, that was nothing but the will of God. It's his will and it's going to be done." Let me tell you how against hospitals and doctors this man was. One day, one of his daughters had an appendix burst, and Warren is like, "Listen, throw a towel on it, with some cold water. She'll feel better. It's not serious enough for us to go to the doctors." Eventually, their mom was able to convince him to let them bring their daughter to the hospital. And once they got there, they realized, she could have died because her appendix burst. Then, one of his younger sons accidentally shot himself in the stomach with an arrow. And Warren's like, "How dare you hurt yourself on this holy day? We will go to the doctors tomorrow, to the local Mormon doctor, okay? We're not going to one of those big fancy hospitals. No, you'll wait it out. If you bleed out, you bleed out. If you're supposed to live, then that means it was the will of God for you to live." Then, it's insane how many times these weird ass things have happened where I'm just continuing to go on. But I think this is the last one. And then one of his other sons got so sick and had such an extreme fever that the family begged Warren to bring him to the hospital. And once again, he's just like, "If it's the Lord's will, dude, what?" So they did not bring him to the hospital. And this son ended up healing by the graces of God, right? But because his fever got so bad, his brain suffered and he was not mentally the same afterwards. Yeah, Warren is a psychopath. With a dad like that, it's a miracle that any of his kids turned out remotely normal. Well, despite what I've told you about Warren Lafferty, his second son, Dan Lafferty, will say something completely different. Dan remembered his father fondly. He considered Warren a superb role model who centered their lives around family and faith. Dan was especially close to his oldest brother, the firstborn, Ron, and both of these brothers had similar short tempers. And as they got older, and by older, I mean married with children older, they began to have issues with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Dan believed that the mainstream Mormon church made a mistake by abandoning polygamy And after Ron started having issues with the leaders of the church, he's like, you know what? They're doing things wrong in this church. Who are they to say that we cannot have more than one wife? Prior to this crazy thought of polygamy, Ron and his wife were once happy. Ron had a successful business, but near this time of him wanting to change the Mormon religion, his business began to fall apart. Then the church was like, hey, I cannot lend you any more money because your brother Dan is acting like a psycho and he's in the streets preaching about polygamy. He was caught making out with another woman while he's married. And he's just telling everyone that polygamy is okay as long as the woman is a virgin. Well, how many women, like adult women virgins, do you know? Most virgins are underage. So, like, Dan, what are you really going after? The church is like, yeah, Ron, we're not giving anyone with the Lafferty last name any money until you can control your brother Dan. Ron just starts spiraling out of control, following into his younger brother's footsteps of preaching the word of polygamy. And with this new belief of polygamy, Ron's wife is like, yeah, we're going to get out of here because you and your brother are psychos. Ron's wife takes their 6 children and herself and they move from Utah to Florida. Now it's 1982. Dan Lafferty had been excommunicated from the church for trying to make his 14-year-old stepdaughter his second wife. See, friends, I told you, like, the virgin thing, you're not fooling anyone. You're not going after a 24, 25, 30-year-old virgin. You're going after a child. You're a pedophile. So, his wife, of course, is like, what the heck? No, I'm not gonna let you marry my daughter and become her sister wife. That's not gonna happen. That's my child. I need to get her away from you, away from your family. So she ends up going to the church, telling them what his plan was. And they immediately was like, hey, he has got to go. And they excommunicated him. A year later, in 1983, his older brother Ron was also excommunicated due to his extreme religious views, including an embrace of polygamy. So together, the brothers are like, you know what? We need a church that's going to allow us to have as many wives as we want and just be the men of God that God wants us to be. Now, it's 1984, and the two brothers find a polygamous cult called the School of Prophets. The brothers grew their hair long and started to see themselves as the church's true leaders. So much so that Ron began to claim that he is communicating with God. And friends, that was a little background on the Lafferty brothers. Now, we're going to fast forward to March 1984. This is when Ron Lafferty supposedly received his divine instruction from God, telling him to murder the people who had wronged him. Who, you wonder? Well, his sister-in-law, Brenda, was on top of the list. Why? Because she helped his wife leave him and take their children with her. Next on the list was Chloe Lowe, because she supported his wife in leaving him. And then we have Richard Stowe, the man who let it be known that he, Ron Lafferty, had been excommunicated from the church. So yeah, in Ron's head, he's like, these people have got to go. Ron wrote down God's so-called message on a yellow legal pad and showed it to his brother. The message, which they named the Removal Revelation, read, "Thus saith the Lord unto my servants the prophets, it is my will and commandment that ye remove the following individuals in order that my work might go forward. For they have truly become obstacles in my path, and I will not allow my work to be stopped. First, thy brother's wife Brenda and her baby, then Chloe Lowe, and then Richard Stowe. And it is my will that they be removed in rapid succession." Friends, you heard me correct. he did say his brother's wife, Brenda, and her baby. Brenda and their youngest brother, Alan, had their first child together. And that is the baby who Ron and Dan Lafferty have mentioned in an interview for the show Under the Banner of Heaven on Hulu, which, friends, I had no interest in watching that show until I started doing my investigation on this case. But let me tell you, it is definitely worth a watch. It's really good. I'm kind of summarizing everything into this podcast episode. So if you want more details as to their childhood and their marriage and everything leading up to their, what do they call it? Their removal, revelation, and what happens afterwards, I would definitely give this show a watch. It's really good. So anyways, in an interview, Dan says that Ron was initially frightened by the revelation. He said, I told him, well, I can see why you're concerned. All I can say is make sure it's from God. You don't want to act on commandments that are not from God. But at the same time, you don't want to offend God by refusing to do his work. Yeah, that's some sound advice, Dan. Thanks. So the two brothers, Dan and Ron, read some passages in the Book of Mormon, and they decided to obey the removal revelation. And the first to be removed would be their youngest brother's 24-year-old wife, Brenda Lafferty, and their 15-month-old niece, Erica. Now, friends, we're going to pause here, and we're going to talk about Brenda Lafferty. Brenda Wright Lafferty was born on July 19, 1960, in Logan, Utah. Brenda was the second oldest of 5 daughters to Lorraine Hatch Wright and Dr. James Lewis Wright. She grew up in Ithaca, New York, and before she was in high school, her family settled in Kimberly, Idaho. After completing a year of college at the University of Idaho, Brenda transferred to BYU, which stands for Brigham Young University in Utah, to pursue her dream of becoming a broadcast journalist. While there, she got a job as a news anchor on BYU TV, and she also met the man who she would later marry, Alan Lafferty. Dan and Ron Lafferty said that Brenda had always rubbed them the wrong way. She was confident and beautiful and educated. Like all the things a woman should not be. How dare her come into our place wearing pants and not a skirt or a dress? How dare her question what we say instead of just being submissive and just thinking her thoughts silently? You don't vocalize what you're thinking. No one cares. We're men. You're the woman. You do as we say. So, the thing that really set them off was that Brenda disagreed with their fundamentalist views. And she definitely didn't agree that Ron Lafferty was a prophet. Brenda spoke her mind, and when they tried to convert her husband, Alan, she was like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. We are saying your brothers are friggin' crazy. We're going to continue doing what we are doing. And you let them be crazy together. They're not roping you into this, okay? So, the brothers, Dan and Ron, did tell Alan about their plan. But Alan, being their naive younger brother, just thought that they were talking. He never believed that they would actually kill his wife and his daughter. A few months after Ron received his removal revelation, which was in March 1984, he and Dan put their plan into action. And on July 24, 1984, Dan, Ron, and 2 hitchhikers drove to Brenda and Alan's apartment in American Fork, Utah, to kill her. The 2 hitchhikers, Charles Carnes and Richard Knapp, waited in the getaway car. Okay, friends, this next part is graphic and heartbreaking. Ron and Dan forces their way into Brenda's apartment. They beat her, they strangle her with a vacuum cord, and cut her throat. One of the hitchhikers, Richard Knapp, said that Brenda fought back, screaming, "Don't hurt my baby, please don't hurt my baby." And then suddenly, there just wasn't any more crying. Friends, What in the world? Even if you don't believe in God, you still know that the God that people worship is supposed to be like a loving God. He wouldn't ask anyone to kill anyone else, especially a baby. So for Dan and Ron to actually believe that they heard God's message versus it being their own ego wanting her gone, I don't know. That's just letting you know where their mindset is. So Dan Lafferty recalls his part in the murder with a calm, chilling detail. He shares, "I held Brenda's hair and did it pretty much the way they did it in the scriptures, Then I walked into Erica's room. I talked to her for a minute. I said, I'm not sure why I'm supposed to do this, but I guess God wants you home." And then he cut the 15-month-old baby's throat. He also shares, "I like to think she didn't suffer. It probably should draw more sympathy than it does, but I don't let it." That was a baby. You are evil. Like, you're just saying this like you're ordering a cup of coffee. Like, you're just so friggin' nonchalant about the whole thing. It's sickening. The other hitchhiker, Charles Carnes, testified at trial that yes, Dan did kill Erica the baby, and Ron killed Brenda, their sister-in-law. Charles Carnes recalled that as they fled the scene, Ron pulled a knife out of his pocket and hit it against his knee, saying, "I killed her. I killed her. I killed that bitch. I can't believe I killed her." Charles also recalls Ron turning to his younger brother, Dan, saying, "Thank you, brother, for doing the baby, because I don't think I had it in me." What? You both are freaking monsters. Not only was that just a baby, that was your freaking niece. I don't understand how someone could be filled with so much hatred. That day, they only killed Brenda and her daughter, but they did want to kill everybody on their hit list. However, when they went to Chloe Lowe's home, she wasn't there. And then, when they were out searching for Richard Stowe's house, they just kept getting lost. So they were like, you know what? Let's just go to Nevada. Luck was actually on the side of Chloe and Richard. Otherwise, they would have met the same fate as poor Brenda and baby Erica. Dan says, "I would have killed them the same way. But once the next step didn't happen, I knew it wasn't meant to. There wasn't much enthusiasm for it." Like I said, friends, he's acting like what he's doing is not real, like he's not actually taking the lives of human beings. So now, it's a few hours later, Alan Lafferty returns home to a gruesome scene. He sees his 24-year-old wife and his 15-month-old baby are both dead. He immediately knew that it was his two older brothers that killed them. A month later, on August 17, 1984, both Ron and Dan Lafferty were arrested in Reno, Nevada, along with their accomplices, Charles Carnes and Richard Knapp. All four of them were charged with 2 counts of criminal homicide, 2 counts of aggravated burglary, and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit homicide. The brothers were supposed to stand trial together, but on December 30th, 1984, Ron attempted suicide in prison. And this suicide attempt damaged his brain, which affected his memory and his emotional control. Ron also tried to kill his younger brother, Dan, while in prison, and all of this delayed his trial, as he now had to be tried separately from Dan. At Dan Lafferty's trial in January 1985, Dan represented himself and was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder and 4 other felonies, and was sentenced to 2 life terms in prison. A lone holdout juror spared Dan Lafferty's death sentence. Ron Lafferty was tried in April 1985 and was also found guilty, but given the death penalty. Despite years of appeals based on Ron's mental state, the death sentence stuck. However, Ron died on November 11th, 2019, before his execution, which was set to be, per his request, by firing squad. He died of natural causes after spending 34 years on death row. As of 2022, Dan Lafferty was still in the Utah State Prison serving a life sentence. Normally, right here, I would wrap it up, right? Well, my friend Carissa, who loves to help investigate crimes that aren't well known, she found the following for me. A different story, but it's still related to Dan Lafferty. In 1984, Christy Strack was 6 years old when the Lafferty brothers murdered their sister-in-law and their niece. Christy Strack had developed an obsession with the case that turned into a close year-long friendship with Dan Lafferty. Per the Springville Police Corporal Greg Turnbow, Christy Strack reached out to Dan Lafferty's daughter, and both Christy and her husband became close friends with Dan for several years. Dan Lafferty and Christy Strack had a father-daughter type of relationship, and when she suffered from ovarian cancer, she went to Dan Lafferty to see if he could help cure her. The frequent communication with Dan and Christy didn't raise any concerns by the Utah prison officials until 2008, when she tried to pass her brother off as her husband so he could come and visit Dan Lafferty. After that, the authorities were like, yeah, she's done visiting him because that's freaking weird. So they prevented Christy and her husband Benjamin from ever visiting Dan again. During the same year, 2008, the Strack couple decided that they were going to start homeschooling their children, which is not odd. You know, there's a lot of reasons that people would love to homeschool their children. But with the mindset of Benjamin and Christy, it's definitely weird. They became more bizarre and started believing that the apocalypse was near, which was the reason for them pulling their kids out of school. So they decided that they were going to kill themselves with a drug overdose and take their 3 children, Benson, who's 14, Emery, who's 12, and Zion, who's 11, with them. Christy Strack, who was 36 at the time, was being prescribed methadone, and the investigators believe she got the methadone and used it in the family's overdose deaths. And when the police officer went to go talk to Dan Lafferty as a part of this investigation, Dan said that he believed himself to be the biblical prophet Elijah. So no help. He never once told them anything about the Strack family ending their lives, nor the lives of their children. Police didn't find any notes or letters to show why the Strack parents believed what they did, why they killed themselves and their family, but they did often share with family members and friends about wanting to escape what they saw as a growing evil in the world. So, of course, their friends and family are thinking like, oh, you know, maybe they're going to move somewhere remote, live off the grid, but no one expected them to do what they did. Benjamin Strack, who was 37 years old at the time, hadn't been to work for a week. And when Christy Strack's older son from a previous marriage came over one day because he hasn't heard from anyone, he said he found the family's bodies in a locked bedroom on September 27th, 2014. The investigators found that Benjamin Strack had high levels of heroin in his system, while his wife Christy had methadone, dextrofen, and a bunch of other drugs, and both deaths were ruled as suicides. All 3 children died from a mixture of the drugs, and the 2 youngest children's deaths were ruled as homicides because they were too young to consent to this suicide. Investigators found several empty methadone bottles, 10 empty boxes of nighttime cold medicine, and 2 boxes of allergy medicine in their garbage, along with a red liquid substance in Pepsi cups. They also found a pitcher of red juice, a purple bucket with yellow liquid, a bag of marijuana, and other medications, including sleeping pills, inside the home. Christy Strack was also found with an unidentified red liquid coming out of her mouth. After the deaths, police found a letter from Benson Strack, the 14-year-old, to his best friend, bequeathing some of his possessions, showing that the teen thought he might be found dead one day. Friends, isn't that crazy? Everything about this story is just completely insane and heartbreaking. And friends, this wraps up the dark and twisted case of the Lafferty brothers, a case where faith, obsession, and unchecked belief led to unthinkable violence. Brenda and little Erica didn't deserve what happened to them, nor did the children of the Strack family. If this story kept you on edge, make sure to subscribe, share, and leave a review. It helps more true crime followers find cold-blooded serial. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.